So, as you may know, I like reading physical books. I used to be a very much ebook reader and I read all of my books electronically on my Kindle and was very happy with that. And then over the last couple of years, I don't know what's happened, but I really struggle to digest a story in ebook format now. So I prefer having physical books. Entirely psychological, I'm sure, but it's just the way it is. So I have quite a lot of physical books, and I will have my most recent bookshelf tour linked up above for you. But I just did a little count and I currently have 240 books on my bookshelves just in my reading room, and of those 240 books I have 69 that are unread. So today I want to take you through all of the books that I have on my shelves that are unread, somewhat to hold myself accountable to reading them and somewhat just because I thought you might be interested to know which books I have that I still have to read on my shelves. I'm not going to go into full synopses for all of these because otherwise this video would be 100 hours long, but I am going to give you a brief idea of the genre and the age range for each one. And editing me is going to hate myself for this, but there will be little pictures up here of every single one of these 69 books. So wish future me luck because I'm already dreading that. So we have The Toymakers by Robert Dinsdale, that is middle grade fantasy. Solaris by Stanislaw Lem, which is a classic sci-fi, which I think is for adults. Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman, young adult fantasy romance. The Lies of Loch Lamora by Scott Lynch, adult epic fantasy. King's Cage and Warstorm by Victoria Aveyard, both of which are young adult fantasy. The City of Dreaming Books by Walter Moers, which is translated adult fantasy. The Curse of Chalion by Lois McMaster Bujold, which is adult, I believe, fantasy. The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin, classic fantasy for adults, as is The Fountains of Paradise by Arthur C. Clarke. Crown of Midnight by Sarah J. Maas, which is young adult fantasy, or new adult if we're counting that as a age range, which I don't think we are. W. Juliet by Emura, which is manga. No idea of the age range. Maid's-Armor volumes 3 and 4. Ditto, no idea of the age range, but it is manga. Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind by Hayao Miyazaki. Again, no idea on age range, but it is manga. The Girl of Fire and Thorns short stories collection by Ray Carson, which is young adult fantasy. The Unbound by Victoria Schwab, which is also young adult fantasy. The First 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North is historical fiction sci-fi for young adults. Siege and Storm, Ruin and Rising and Six of Crows by Lee Bardugo, which are young adult fantasy. Obsidio by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman, which is young adult sci-fi. Wondersmith by Jessica Townsend, middle grade fantasy. The Book of Dust by Philip Pullman, middle grade fantasy. The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, young adult magical realism, I think. The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert, which is young adult fantasy. Oh My Gods by Alexandra Shepherd, which is young adult urban fantasy. American Royals by Catherine McGee, which is young adult contemporary / romance. State of Sorrow and Song of Sorrow by Melinda Salisbury, both of which are young adult fantasy. Lost Princess by Connie Glynn, which is young adult, although appropriate for middle grade readers as well, I think, and it's a mixture of contemporary and mystery and possibly presumably fantasy. It's written in a fairy tale-like style. I've read the first 2 books in the series, but there aren't fairy tale elements. It's just written in that kind of style. Full Disclosure by Cameron Garrett is young adult contemporary, hard-hitting contemporary specifically. Sea Witch by Sarah Henning is young adult fantasy / young adult retelling. Alex in Wonderland by Simon James Green, which is young adult contemporary. We Set the Dark on Fire by Taylor K. Magia, which is fantasy, young adult. Birthday by Meredith Russo is young adult contemporary. Given the controversy though, I'm not 100% sure if I still want to read this one. What She Found in the Woods by Josephine Angelini, which is young adult mystery thriller. This Time Will Be Different by Misa Suguera, which is young adult contemporary with magical realism. Ash Princess by Laura Sebastian, which is young adult fantasy. Red Sister by Mark Lawrence, adult fantasy. An Ember in the Ashes by Saba Tahir, young adult fantasy. A Wise Man's Fear, Patrick Rothfuss, adult fantasy. Queen of Nothing by Holly Black, young adult fantasy. A River of Royal Blood by Amanda Joy, young adult fantasy. The Demon King by Cinda Williams Chimer, young adult fantasy. The Kiss of Deception by Mary E. Pierce, young adult fantasy. Raw by Cora Cormack, also young adult fantasy. We Are Okay by Nina LaCour, which is hard-hitting contemporary, I believe, for young adults. Keeper of the Lost Cities by Shannon Messenger, which is middle grade fantasy. The Thief by Megan Wallen Turner, young adult fantasy. Gardens of the Moon by Stephen Erickson is adult fantasy. Epic fantasy specifically. Warcross by Marie Lu, young adult science fiction. The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton, which is young adult mystery thriller / science fiction, so I understand it. Furthermore by Tahira Murphy is middle grade fantasy. And then Temeraire by Naomi Novik is young adult fantasy. Dracula by Bram Stoker, classic horror, presumably for adults. Spinning Silver, also by Naomi Novik, and also young adult fantasy, although I believe it's also a retelling. The Dreadful Tale of Prosper Redding by Alexandra Bracken, middle grade fantasy. The Giver by Lewis Lowry, dystopian for young adults. Love and Gelato by Jenna Evans Welch, young adult romance contemporary. Pet Cemetery by Stephen King, adult horror. Mort by Terry Pratchett, young adult, I believe, fantasy. The Tiger's Daughter and the Phoenix Empress by Kay Arsenault Rivera, which I believe are adult and they are fantasy. A Court of Thorns and Roses, A Court of Mist and Fury, and A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J. Maas, which are new adult or young adult fantasy romance. The Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson, adult fantasy. 8 Will Fall by Sarah Harrion, young adult fantasy. And finally, Wicked As You Wish by Rin Chupeco, which is also young adult fantasy. And those are the 69 books on my shelves that I have not yet read. I am excited to read pretty much all of them. As I mentioned, there's one I'm not 100% sure about, but time will tell on that one. I may still read it. And that's it for this summary of my physical TBR. If you happen to know how many unread books you have on your shelves, then please let me know down below. I'd be super interested in finding out. But that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks. Bye.